The evening had fallen softly over the small town, the sky painted in bruised shades of purple and gold. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting circles of amber across the quiet road. Daniel drove slowly, the low hum of his old truck blending with the distant sound of crickets. He wasn't in a hurry to get home. These days, home felt more like an empty shell, walls that echoed with memories, a silence that never seemed to end. 2 years had passed since the accident. 2 years since he'd lost the two people who meant the world to him, his wife, Sarah, and their little girl, Emily. They had gone missing during a storm while driving back from her parents' home. The car had been found near the river, but not them. For months he'd searched every lead, every hope, every whisper of a miracle. But nothing. Eventually, the town moved on. People stopped asking. But Daniel never did. He lived in quiet routines now, fixing cars, helping neighbors, keeping his mind busy so his heart wouldn't shatter again. That night, he was driving home from a late repair job on the outskirts of town. The air was cold enough to fog his breath, and he turned up the heater, staring into the narrow road ahead. And that's when he saw it, a small shape darting across the light of his headlights. He slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. The shape froze in the middle of the road, a golden retriever, trembling, covered in mud, eyes wide with fear. Daniel's heart softened instantly. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching against the gravel. The dog didn't move, only stared at him as if waiting for something. He crouched a few feet away, his voice gentle, calm. He noticed the dog had a torn collar, no tag, and a deep scratch on its paw. The animal whimpered softly, tail low, uncertain whether to trust him. Daniel stayed still, letting the silence stretch until the dog took a hesitant step forward. When it finally reached him, it pressed its head against his knee, shivering. That small gesture, that fragile, desperate trust, broke something open inside him. He wrapped his jacket around the dog, carried it into the truck, and whispered softly, as if speaking to an old friend. He drove home slowly, the dog curled up on the seat beside him. Every so often, it lifted its head, looking out the window as though searching for something familiar. Daniel smiled sadly. He knew that feeling too well. When they got home, he cleaned the dog carefully, tending to the scratch with gentle hands. He gave it some food and water, then sat beside it on the floor. The dog seemed restless, glancing toward the door again and again. Daniel figured it must belong to someone nearby, maybe lost during the storm that had rolled through earlier that week. The next morning, he made a few calls, checked with the local shelter, even posted on a community board. No one had reported a missing golden retriever. So he decided to keep it with him until someone came forward. He named the dog Max. Days turned into weeks, and Max became his quiet companion. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt the faint warmth of something like peace returning. The house wasn't as quiet anymore. Max followed him everywhere, to the garage, to the store, even on his long drives through the countryside. And slowly, the ache in Daniel's heart began to shift. One evening, as he walked Max near the edge of town, the dog suddenly stopped. Its ears perked up, nose twitching. Then it bolted off the trail, barking wildly. Daniel ran after him, calling his name, heart pounding as he stumbled through the brush. Max stopped in front of an old farmhouse, barking and whining near the porch. There was a faint light inside. An elderly woman opened the door, surprised to see a man standing there with a golden retriever at her steps. She smiled gently, her eyes soft with recognition. She said she'd seen the dog before, months ago, wandering near the woods. She mentioned something strange too, a small cabin deeper in the forest, where she sometimes saw light flickering at night. She thought it was abandoned, but lately, she'd heard voices, even laughter. Daniel felt a jolt of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time, hope. The next morning, he packed a flashlight, a thermos of coffee, and some food, and headed toward the woods. Max trotted beside him, tail wagging, as if he already knew the way. The forest was quiet, only the sound of rustling leaves and distant birds. After nearly an hour of walking, Daniel saw it, a small cabin, half hidden by trees, smoke rising gently from its chimney. He approached cautiously, his heart racing. The cabin looked lived in, curtains on the window, a small garden outside, children's drawings pinned to the door. He called out, his voice trembling slightly. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door creaked open. A little girl stepped out. Her hair was longer now, but those eyes, those bright, unmistakable eyes, were the same. She stared at him for a moment, then whispered one word that shattered his world open again. "Daddy." Daniel froze. The world around him blurred. He dropped to his knees, tears flooding his eyes as she ran into his arms. He held her tightly, afraid that if he let go, she might vanish again. Moments later, a familiar voice called from inside, soft, cautious, trembling. Sarah stepped out, her face pale with disbelief. Time seemed to stop. They ran to each other, colliding in tears and laughter, a miracle unfolding under the morning sun. Max barked joyfully beside them, tail wagging furiously. Daniel could barely speak. He just kept saying her name, over and over, as if trying to convince himself it was real. When they finally sat together inside, Sarah explained everything. The storm that night had caused the car to skid off the road. She'd been injured, lost consciousness, and when she awoke, they were deep in the woods. With no phone signal and roads washed out, she had found an old cabin with Emily and stayed there, surviving off supplies left behind by the previous owner. For months, she had tried to make contact, but the storm had destroyed the nearest path to town. And Max, the dog, had found them a few weeks earlier, kept them safe, even led Sarah to small streams for water. But one night, he disappeared. She thought he'd never return. Daniel looked at Max, who now lay calmly by the fire, as if he understood the miracle he had brought. That dog had been the bridge between despair and reunion, the thread that tied two lost worlds back together. As the days passed, Daniel helped them move back home. The house that once felt cold and empty was now filled with laughter again, Emily's footsteps running through the hallways, Sarah's soft humming as she cooked, Max sleeping near the window. Every morning, Daniel would look at the rising sun and whisper a quiet thank you, not just for finding them, but for the lesson that changed him forever. Sometimes, he would sit on the porch and think about that night, the night he stopped for a lost dog. He realized that kindness is rarely convenient. It's often unexpected, sometimes messy, and sometimes it asks us to stop in the middle of our pain and open our hearts again. But when we do, it has the power to lead us home, to love, to healing, to miracles we never saw coming. And every time Max came over and rested his head on Daniel's knee, he would smile and say softly, almost like a prayer, that sometimes, helping someone lost is the way we find ourselves again.